So, welcome to the Silver Sirens Virtual Sanctuary and to our wonderful masterclass, Sensual Adventure, Exploring Your Inner Desires and with Confidence with Richelle Menzies. Over to you, Richelle.
Oh, thank you so much, Faith. I really am looking forward to sharing sensuality with everyone here today. So just before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians from the lands from where everyone is coming and allowing us to be on all of these beautiful lands, and the custodianship of the lands, the seas, the flora, the fauna, and that this wasn't always will be Aboriginal land. So sometimes there's this confusion around what is sensuality and what is sexuality. So quite often when people talk about sensuality, they really are meaning sexuality. But it's important to understand they are two quite different things. So we'll start to unpack those in a moment. But as you can see here, as this one of these images says, sensuality is the yearning that allows you to experience the depths of love and intimacy with yourself and others. And now that is one aspect, definitely, of sensuality, but it's also around engaging your senses, which we will talk a little bit more to in a moment. But firstly, well, what is sexuality and how is that different? So this is the World Health Organization's definition of sexuality. It's been around almost 20 years now, and it still is very, very fit for purpose. But as you can see here, it encompasses more than just your sexual orientation. So the thing that I think is really important when we're talking about sensuality is the discussions around pleasure and what does that look like for you. And there's so many ways that you can express your sexuality, as you can see here: thoughts, fantasies, desires, beliefs, attitudes, values, behaviors, practices, roles, and relationships. And I think when it comes to sensuality and how we express that, it's much more embodied than it is around these other aspects. So when we're looking at sensuality, it's really, in many cases, relating to gratification of the senses. It kind of says it in the word, doesn't it? Or perhaps indulgence of the appetite. It's relating to enjoyment derived from the senses, physically enjoyable or pleasurable, as I sort of mentioned before when we talked about sexuality, we're talking about pleasure. The state or quality of being sensual is a fondness for or an indulgence in sexual pleasures. So an unrestrained indulgence in sensual pleasures is often the term that can be used. And this is sort of the encyclopedia definition, but it comes from a range of different areas. When we start to unpack where words come from and what is the root of the words, it makes a lot more sense as to what their meaning might be. So the word sensuality comes from the root word sense, which makes sense, which pertains to our five senses, our sight, our sound, touch, smell, and taste. And the Greek word often meant a total devotion to the pleasures of the physical senses, sometimes implying outrageous conduct, which I think sometimes that's also seen today as well. And as I said, it is different from sexuality. It's much more broader than sexual attraction and eroticism. And it's also more subtle, and it's more cognitive than sensation. And it's like beyond just reflexive feeling or reaction resulting from excitement. There's also something that goes on in our brains. There's several different definitions for sensuality. And so one of them is it's the basis of how we experience our bodies, other bodies, and the world around us. Sensuality is for everyone, whether you're single, whether you're partnered, whether you have multiple partners, or whether you've never engaged in a sexual connection at all. So it isn't necessarily connected to sex, which many people often think it is. For you, maybe your ultimate sensual pleasure is wearing cozy pajamas. Perhaps it's sipping a cup of tea in a quiet home. For me, I know quite often it is having a cup of tea or coffee and sitting in the sunshine and feeling the warmth of the sun on my body and that sense of bliss that comes with that. That's all sensuality. It's a way that you positively inhabit your body while you're engaging all of those senses. So now let's have a look at senses and what we're looking at when it comes to that.
We have 8 senses. 5 you have probably heard of: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch. And 3 that you may not be familiar with. The vestibular sense, sometimes known as the gravity or balance sense, allows us to move smoothly. It helps us with balance while we walk and run, and to stay upright when we sit and stand. Proprioception is the sense of self-movement, force, and body position. It is present in every muscle movement you have. Without proprioception, you wouldn't be able to move without thinking about your next step. Interoception helps you understand and feel what's going on inside your body. For example, when you're hungry, thirsty, in pain, or need the toilet. Imagine for each of our 8 senses, we have a cup. And for us to feel regulated, each cup needs to be full. Each time we get some sensory input for one of our senses, it fills up the cup a little. For each sense, some of us have big cups, and some of us have small cups. Imagine you have a small cup for sound. It fills up quickly with a little noise, and any more can feel overwhelming. Imagine you have a big cup for proprioception. You will need lots of movement to feel regulated. Understanding someone's sensory profile is really important in order to know what they need to feel, learn, and perform at their best.
So as you can see, it's much more than the 5 senses that we often think about. And anyone who's aware of neurodiversity might have heard the terms proprioception and interoception. And sometimes people who are neurodivergent might struggle with some of those. So their cups might be quite small if we're looking at it in that way. So when we're looking at sensuality, as you could see from the video, some of these things we can feel a lot, and that feels really good for us. And for some of these things, our bodies might only be able to take a little bit because a lot is too overwhelming. So it's really about trusting in yourself and receiving your own permission to really be who you are and to move in the world in a way that works for you. It's about enjoying your life as a woman and the woman that you want to be. It's about how you relate to yourself. Allowing pleasure to guide you is highly evolved and profound discipline. And for some people, that can be really difficult. As women, we're not often told that we can engage in what is pleasurable for us. It's so much about what we can do for others. It's much easier for women to stay small and miserable than it is to stay true to ourselves. And that's often a message that we're given. But within our sensuality, we can feel more connected to ourselves. We can feel more connected to other people, to our life, to our surroundings, and who we want to be as a woman, who we desire to be. So thinking about all of these different senses, and perhaps the ones that you hadn't heard about before, just consider for a moment, which of these are ones that you might have big cups for and really want to take all of that in, and it feels fantastic for you when perhaps you get a lot of beautiful images in front of you, or smells might really make your body tingle and you can really feel those. And which ones are the ones that maybe are not so much? Perhaps lots of noise is something that's a little bit more difficult for you. So when you're looking at engaging in the world in a sensual way, it's really important to understand what levels of each of these senses is the best for you. And there's a whole range of other messages that also go along with this. As we get older, there's a whole range of messages around pleasure that we may not necessarily be getting as many positive messages as we get older. This is where ageism comes in. If we think about the messages we get, there's lots of memes like these that, while they're funny and maybe sometimes a little bit true, there's not anything very positive, is there? Yeah, in an individualistic society like we have, it's almost as that when a person has white or grey hair, you become invisible. You're no longer desirable. Perhaps you might be treated like a child, might be seen as being deficient or a burden. But there are many collective societies that value and revere their elders. And I think it's really important to kind of shift the narrative around what we hear as we get older. And what does aging look like? What are the messages that are out there in society? And what are the messages that we take on board? When it comes to our sexuality, people are often portrayed as they're older in a very sex negative way. So these are the messages that we often take on board. And this also impacts how we are as sensual beings. And it is very much around flipping this narrative to be much more positive and seeing more positive messages out there. These messages come from a time when we didn't really talk about aging, when we didn't talk about being sexual beings as we age, where we didn't talk about sensuality. And a lot of it, there was a huge shift in the 60s and 70s with the sexual revolution, but it was this shift towards being more open about these conversations, but only with younger people. These conversations weren't happening with older people. And if older people talked about being sensual or sexual beings, then it was often regarded as something that was a bit of an anomaly. It was certainly okay for men to be seen in that way, but the messages were not so positive for women. If we think to what our grandmothers were like, many of them might have been quite reserved or inhibited and definitely didn't have these conversations. We're hearing so much more about menopause now, and only like really in the last 12 months. If we think back to, did our mothers ever talk about that? Did our grandmothers ever talk about that? There was so much about being a woman and what happened to a woman as she aged that was definitely not up for conversations. And it was often also portrayed, as I said, in this really negative way. So how do we reframe it? What do we do as women over a certain age? How can we change those messages? I certainly see, many more images today of older people who are, people like Faith, people like many of the women who are probably on this call that are doing it differently. They're embracing who they are as an older woman. They're embracing all of the positive things that come along with that. So it's time to ditch those negative messages that don't serve you. It's important to grow in your confidence. And as we age, we do tend to care a little bit less about what other people think. And that can certainly help us with our confidence and being much more true to ourselves and who we want to be, rather than who we thought we had to be for everybody else. And I do love this quote down the bottom because, it's really important to play. And as Iris says, get dressed up. It's, show the world who you are and what you want to be. There's this freedom that children have, which is then impacted by negative societal messages about who we should be. As we get older, we can kind of throw that off and we can be who we want to be, who we desire to be. And one of the other side effects that happens is that we become less obsessed with our bodies. We become much more confident in who we are. We kind of accept our bodies for how they are, and how they function is often a lot more important to us than how they look. And our senses definitely come into how our bodies function. So when we're looking at some statistics around older people, as you can see here, most of us are much more comfortable in ourselves, and we also have a much clearer idea about what we want to do and what our purpose is. Many more people are feeling positive about aging. They're throwing away all those negative ideas that we've had for a really long time. And certainly there's a significant number that feeling that their lives now are much better than they expected them to be. We're not worrying about periods. We're not worrying about pregnancies. And as I said, we're much more probably concerned with how our bodies function than we are about how they look and how they function in regard to our senses. And this is where sensuality comes into play. As I said, it's really important to understand which of your senses can have more stimulation than others. And all of this goes towards us being more comfortable in our bodies and who we are. On a search for positive images about aging, it was not easy to find many. And I think it's fantastic that in the media now, we are seeing strong, positive role models of older women. But that was certainly something that we haven't seen for a long time. We're seeing movies that have got people forming relationships later in life, and that people can still be intimate and sensual no matter what their age. So thinking back on my life, these are kind of some of the things that I certainly found happen. And I guess, 40s is where maybe some of the careless factor started to creep in. 50s, definitely there was a lot more. And 60s, it was like, really, this is who I am, and just take me for as I am. And what you think about that, I actually really don't care about. So that careless factor just grows and grows as we get older. We're much more clear about what we want in our lives, and we're a lot more confident in asking for what we want. We've got all of those life experiences behind us, and we've probably learned a lot about communication skills, and we're starting to understand more about what's really important to us as we move into those later years. We're also really secure in who we are, and often also in our relationships. Some people may have been in their relationships for many decades, and they're very, very secure, and they're very comfortable, and they have great communication, and it's a really positive thing in their life. Some people may have not had such positive relationships for a long time, but they certainly learned from the relationships that they did have. So they're probably what's the word I'm looking for? Picky's not the word, but perhaps that might work for some people. But they're really more considerate about who they engage in their relationships with. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships. I'm talking about all the relationships that we have in our world, the relationships we have with our family members and those that we might have with our friends. We're much more considered about who we engage with in those relationships, because we only engage in those that we know are positive for us. Some people become much more open to exploration and doing things that are different. Most of their life, they're probably been told, oh, you can't do that, or that's not okay. And there comes a point where people become much more open to things like engaging in kink and BDSM, or even opening up their relationships. And that's something we certainly see many people start to explore. And particularly the kink and BDSM stuff, that really is very sensory for many people. And they find that it just opens up their world in another way. Yet for other people, it is certainly something that they're definitely not interested in. And I think as we get older, we become a lot more clearer as to what we find are things that we really want to engage in. Things that brought us joy and pleasure when we were younger might be quite different at this particular point in our lives. And we also become much more sexually confident. And part of that comes about because we have an understanding of the things that our bodies enjoy. We know that we might like a certain kind of touch. We know that there are certain things that we actually don't like. And we might have engaged in things in the past when we were less confident that really didn't work for us. As we become more confident and we have this understanding about our bodies, we can definitely ask for what we want. We can have that more open communication with other people in our lives. When it comes to positive aging, as I said, we are certainly getting many more messages that are positive nowadays. We're seeing older women just presenting in a way that works for them. And there's so many fabulous older women out there like Iris that just show us we can wear the fabrics that feel good on our bodies. We can wear the colors that we love. Maybe we're still wearing heels. Maybe we're wearing flats now because that works for us. We can be more adventurous in the way that we present ourselves to the world. And part of that buys into sensuality, the colors that we like to see, the fabrics that we like the feel of. You know, we might become more adventurous with the scents that we wear. Some people like one particular scent, they know that works well for them, but other people might start to explore, well, what are some other scents that I might want to wear on my bodies? Now, as we age, sometimes there can be a shift in those, particularly the five senses, that some of them maybe don't work as well as they used to. So perhaps our sense of taste has changed. Perhaps our hearing isn't what it used to be, or our sight, we're wearing glasses and maybe we didn't, or we're having to change our glasses prescription a lot more often. But one of the things that I do see is that people are exploring more with that. I'm seeing funkier glasses that people are wearing and engaging in our senses in a different way. And we certainly do know that sometimes when one sense is starting to become diminished, other senses become heightened. And it's around finding that balance around what is important to us when it comes to our sight, our hearing, our sense of taste, our sense of smell. You know, what are these things that are working for us better now than they did previously? But it's really important that we kind of think into our bodies. What does that feel like? Taking those moments in our life where previously we might have sat down to a meal and kind of, yes, I need to eat this, just get it down. Now we can take that time and we can turn eating a meal into something really sensual. We can sit with the food. We can appreciate what it looks like visually. We can smell the aromas and really breathe them in. We can feel the textures in our mouth. We can maybe hear the crunch of something, so that we turn eating a meal into a sensory experience. We can be more gentle with ourselves. We can be more loving with ourselves. And we can just take that time, because sometimes we do have a lot more time. I spoke previously about the way that we are portrayed in the media. And I think that I've certainly seen, you know, so many more positive images. And we're seeing these actresses that we loved when we were younger aging with us and still working and still being active in their lives. And I don't know if you've seen some of the films that are here, but I think there's this celebration of us as older women. And I think tapping into our sensuality is part of that positive aging. And, you know, there's so many actresses that I can see here that I have loved for many, many years. And yet some of them are a bit older than me, you know, a couple of decades older than me, but I can remember admiring them as I was younger. And I think that admiration for them has just grown as I've seen the way that they portray themselves now as older women. And I think it's really important that we see them as trailblazers and know that if they can do it, we can do it too. You don't have to be a Hollywood actress to revel in who you are as an older woman and in the senses that you have and what they can bring to your life. I love this because this is certainly how I feel. I've done a lot of training in aged care facilities around supporting older people to remain sensual beings, even in a residential facility. And I'm hoping that, you know, through those educations, I'm creating a place where I know I can be myself and possibly be that person who is causing a bit of trouble. And when we're looking at these senses, I want you to kind of think about each of these for yourself. What feels good on your body? I know for me, it's floating in water. Just feels delightful. That soft movement of the water flowing over your skin. Walking in the sunshine. And something I just kind of tapped back into recently was I was away and there was a bath where I was. And so I got some bubble bath, and just feeling the bubbles on my skin was this really lovely sensory experience. What kind of things do you like the smell of? I know for many people, rain. I love the smell of rain coming. Cut grass. And, you know, when I look at scents that I want to wear on my body, I go for something that's fresh and light, whereas someone else might go for something that's really floral. You know, what kind of smells really you really inhale them with your whole body? What tastes good for you? I'm very much, you know, citrus things. I love citrus tastes. But I also love caramelly sort of flavors as well. And, you know, going to a coffee shop, I'll always go for either a caramel slice or a citrus tart because they're quite opposed, but they're both different tastes that I really revel in. I like that light and freshness the same as I do with my sense of smell. What do you like to hear? I know that every time I hear a baby laugh, I just feel that through my whole body. I have tinnitus, and I, you know, quite often a lot of us have, you know, some issues with our hearing as we get older. And I find that I like to have music on in the background. And the music that kind of speaks to me is music from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. So prior to when I was born, but music that my parents were probably listening to when I was really young. And then the music that I grew up with, the music that was around in my teens and in my early 20s. So that's, you know, it's quite a few decades there. And every day I, you know, hey, Google, and I put on a different decade of music. And I love to have that in the background. You know, and what do you like to look at? What are the things that really speak to you? Are there particular colors? You know, I can look out the window and I can see nature. And I really, really love that. Some people like rain on the window. You know, what are the different things that you love to look at? And the beach is something, watching waves rolling in is something that I find really calming and relaxing, but also really, really joyful. So one of the really important things to think about when you're kind of touching into each of those, it's actually about being mindful. It's about being in this moment. What is it that I'm seeing, hearing, tasting, smelling? And what is it I'm touching? And it could be just there, you know, how am I sitting in this particular space that I'm sitting in? So it's really about noticing all of your senses and also having fun with it. You know, do you dance around the house? Do you like to walk? What are the things that bring you joy when it comes to movement? Is it about playing a musical instrument? So there's that touch and there's that sound. So are there things that you do that combine several of those senses? Look for beauty in the everyday. What are those things that you see them and you feel this lift in your heart? What are those things? Try and bring more of that into your world. I talked about, you know, using your senses when you're making a meal or when you're eating a meal. So what are those things that turn eating into an experience for you? And that touch, that sensation on your body, what are those things that you feel are luxurious and just give this lovely sensation of pleasure to your body? For me, it's soft and flowy, and silks and those very sensual fabrics are something that I find really pleasurable. So, try different types of touch, different textures, different fabrics, different scents. And with each of those, how does this feel? Does it spark something in my heart? Does it give me tingles in some way in my body? Is my body really engaging with it? And what feels good? It's not about where is this going to go? What does this mean? It's just sitting with the pleasure of those senses and what feels good for you. So being mindful is one way to really tap into who you are. So meditation and breath work and scanning your body. What does my body feel like here? What does my body feel like there? Touching your body, so self-massage, or when you're putting on lotion, not just kind of slapping it on, but really touching your body and see what does that feel like for you? What does the lotion smell like? I talked about your food and what can you feel there, and creating your home as a sensory haven, having the colors you love, putting on your oils and scents that you love in your home, the textures in your cushions and your fabrics in your home. One of the things to kind of bring in here, though, when you are looking at all of your senses, that for some people who are perhaps neurodiverse or might have chronic pain, some of this tapping in might be a little bit of a challenge. So have some self-compassion if you find some of this a little bit more difficult. Kind of sit with that uncomfortableness that you might be feeling. Kind of observe it, but don't engage with it. And then look at what might you do a little bit differently so that sense of uncomfortableness isn't there. As I said earlier, interoception and proprioception is something that some people might really struggle with, and that's okay. So you kind of work around this in a way that's really going to work for you. So I want to leave you thinking about your 5 senses initially. You can bring in the others over time. Exploring what you currently do, how you currently engage with your senses. Perhaps you're already doing some of these. Perhaps you're a very visual person, so you always have quite beautiful things around you. Perhaps you always have some sort of scent, incense or oils, candles that bring a beautiful scent to your home. So look at what you're already doing, and then look at some of the areas where you might be able to bring more of this into the way that you go in the world. So if anyone wants to know more, please definitely feel free to reach out to me. I'm always open to have a conversation and, take some time to work with you if this is something that you really struggle with. So life is definitely an adventure, and I want you to bring all of your senses with you on that ride in that adventure. So Faith, I'd like to thank you so much for inviting me along today. And I hope that people are able to take something away from this to increase some sensuality in their life as they move forward.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Richelle. I got a lot out of it, and I love the inclusive nature of sensuality, as opposed to sexuality. I love that it's open to everyone, and whether
Definitely.
we're single or whether we're engaged in sex with anyone else, it's something that we can enjoy for ourselves. And I think that's what makes it really beautiful. Yeah, and I'll say my senses, taste is such a big one when you were talking about the different senses. Taste is a big one for me. And I really love the combination of sweet and salty. That's
Yes.
that's like my happy place. I love it.
My treat was buying a block of chocolate and a packet of chips.
Yes. Oh my God,
Yeah.
I love that. So Yeah, it was just really lovely. And I loved what you said about floating on water because I swim most mornings and it's where I do my meditation as well. But just the body dragging in the water and the ocean, I really love that sensation. Love it.
Yeah, it is
Yeah.
beautiful. And I think, I'm in Queensland and it's a little bit cool for swimming in my pool at the moment. But one of the things I just love the most and where I probably am most mindful is floating in the water, looking up at the
Mm.
clouds. And as my body floats
Mm.
around, I'm going under trees and I'm seeing different things and I'm seeing butterflies and dragonflies so I've got all of that visual, but I've got the sense of the flowers in the garden nearby and the
Mm.
warmth of the sun on my skin. So there's a whole lot going on, and I certainly come
Sensory
out of the water
overload.
just feeling really, really in my body.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. Thank you so much. And so, for any women watching this that wants to contact Richelle, please feel free to do so. I will add all of Richelle's details into the resources. So, once again, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. Really appreciate
My absolute pleasure.
it.